What did she do that got her banned from Johnny Carson's stage? Forever? One moment she was America's sweetheart. The next, she vanished from late-night TV like a ghost. Was it a scandal? A personal betrayal? Or something even bigger hiding behind the curtain? Stick around, because the truth behind her disappearance is more jaw-dropping than anyone expected. She vanished from the spotlight without a farewell, a tribute, or even a casual mention. Once hailed as a regular fixture on late-night television, she became a ghost almost overnight. Not even a nostalgic cameo. And the silence? It wasn't just awkward. It was final. One moment she was Johnny Carson's favored guest, and the next, it was as if she'd never existed in his world. There was no explanation, no public fallout, just a closed door. And she wasn't the only one. A quiet list of celebrities found themselves on the wrong end of Carson's smile. When Johnny withdrew his warmth, the industry didn't just look away. It froze. In a town powered by charm and charisma, Carson ruled with both, and something much colder. Ever wondered how a man so beloved could inspire such fear? Back then, one show had the power to anoint or erase. If you were lucky enough to get 5 minutes on that stage, your life could change in an instant. But there was always a price. Beneath the laughter and applause lived a code, unspoken yet absolute. No one needed to spell it out. Everyone just knew. Cross a certain line, sometimes without even realizing, and you'd feel the chill. Not just from Johnny, but from the entire town. Hollywood doesn't need to scream when it wants you gone. It just stops returning your calls. Some of the biggest names didn't fall because they failed. They vanished because Johnny Carson decided it was time. He didn't need to issue a warning or offer an explanation. Just a look, a pause, a missing invite. That's all it took. Viewers at home kept laughing, oblivious to the tightrope every guest walked. They tuned in for comfort, not knowing how many careers were hanging in the balance behind those jokes. One misstep, maybe a joke that lingered too long, maybe talking over Johnny during the banter, and that was it. Sometimes the reasons were deeper. A perceived betrayal, a contract decision, a personal rift that began quietly backstage and ended in a career fade out. The strangest part? No one made a scene. No confrontations, no interviews, no press coverage. Just an eerie quiet. Stars disappeared from the rotation, and when asked, people shrugged and said, "That's just how it is." But for those who were cut off, the silence was deafening. To be removed from Johnny's stage wasn't just about missing a booking. It was career death by omission. Those empty chairs? They told a story. The real drama wasn't in front of the curtain. It was in who never made it back behind it. So how did The Tonight Show get this kind of grip on Hollywood's heart and spine? You'd have to be there to feel it. For decades, The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson wasn't just TV. It was the finish line and the starting gate all in one. Whether you were a struggling comic or an A-lister with a new release, landing a Carson spot was like getting the golden ticket. For many, it didn't just validate a career, it created it. Johnny's wit was surgical, his timing flawless. He could hold silence for just a beat longer than expected, letting the audience fall into the laugh on their own. That kind of command couldn't be taught. Remember Karnak the Magnificent? Johnny, in a ridiculous turban, holding envelopes to his forehead, delivering absurd predictions with a straight face. It was corny, absurd, and somehow brilliant. But it was during the interview couch moment, the Carson wave, where real magic happened. One simple gesture, and a rising comic was pulled into the mainstream overnight. For people like David Letterman and Jerry Seinfeld, that wave was everything. It wasn't just an invitation, it was validation. And people watched, religiously. Long before YouTube clips and binge-watching, there was Johnny. You caught him live or missed the moment forever. His monologues, quirky guests, musical acts, and sketches created a blueprint still mimicked by the likes of Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, and Stephen Colbert. Carson wasn't just a host, he built the house late-night lives in today. But here's where it shifts. When the red light on the camera went dark and the laughter faded, the version of Johnny the audience adored slipped away. What remained was a version far more complicated. Power always has a dark edge, and Carson's was no exception. If you lost his favor, it didn't just bruise your pride. It erased you. Quietly. Effectively. Getting banned from The Tonight Show wasn't like missing a gig. It was like being erased from the collective memory of Hollywood. Agents hesitated. Studios backed away. Even other hosts kept their distance. No one wanted to be seen aligning against the king. And all Johnny had to do was nothing. No statement. No rant. Just silence. That alone was enough to send a signal. And everyone listened. Some tried to pretend it didn't matter. Others knew the truth. Rich Little, once one of the most beloved impressionists on the scene, found himself ousted after too many Carson impressions. The official word was that his act had gone flat, but behind closed doors, it was clear. Johnny wasn't laughing. Dana Carvey, with his razor-sharp impersonation of Carson, got the cold shoulder too. No words, no fight, just a permanent absence. The scariest part? No one knew where the line was until they'd already crossed it. But there was one case that still stings more than any. One star who wasn't just a regular on the show, she was mentored, protected, and propelled by Johnny Carson himself. Joan Rivers didn't just make her name on The Tonight Show. She built it brick by brick with Carson's help. He believed in her before anyone else did, giving her airtime, opportunity, and eventually naming her his guest host. To audiences, they were unstoppable. A comedic force balanced by admiration and loyalty. But behind the stage, something was brewing. When Joan was offered her own show by the then-fledgling Fox network, it was more than just a job. It was history. She'd become the first woman to host a major late-night show. It was bold, it was brave, and it came at a cost. Joan was torn. She knew Carson wouldn't approve, but NBC had made it clear she wasn't in the running to replace him. Not now, not ever. So she said yes to Fox. But the real heartbreak? She never told Johnny herself. He found out from someone else. And in that moment, everything shattered. He didn't raise his voice, didn't shout, didn't send messages through others. Johnny Carson simply went quiet. A silence so sharp, it cut deeper than any insult ever could. When Joan tried to reach him, hoping for some sort of explanation or just a sliver of closure, she was met with nothing but dead air. No callbacks, no replies. Just the sound of a door slamming shut. Forever. She wrote him year after year, aching for forgiveness. But Johnny's silence was louder than words. And not only was she cast out from The Tonight Show, but the invisible walls he built around her extended to anyone who dared appear on her show. That's the kind of power Carson wielded. Cold, unwavering, and absolute. The heartbreak on Joan's end never really faded. Even decades later, her voice cracked when she mentioned his name. She once called him the greatest influence of her professional life. The man who helped her believe she belonged on that stage. He was like a father, she'd say, her eyes drifting somewhere far away. And perhaps that was the hardest part, because once Carson felt betrayed, especially by someone he held close, there was no path back. One producer put it simply, she broke his trust, and that was the end. And it didn't just stop with ghosted letters or unreturned calls. Joan became a ghost herself, on the very show she helped shape. Her appearances were locked away. Her name avoided like a curse. In every way that mattered, she'd been erased. And years later, she wondered aloud if he had believed she was somehow his to keep, that her loyalty should have been eternal. That ache never left her. And when Carson died, She cried. Not just because Hollywood had lost a giant, but because she'd lost the one person she still wished she could reconcile with. But Joan wasn't alone. Others had felt that same cold grip, where one moment on live TV could either crown you or cut you off. Bobcat Goldthwait? Now that was a moment people still whisper about. Loud, unpredictable, and intentionally chaotic, Bobcat once set a chair ablaze during an appearance. Live on air. It was meant to be funny, edgy, but it backfired. The network flipped. Even though Jay Leno was hosting by then, many believed Johnny wouldn't have let Bobcat get away with it either. The fallout? Bobcat was arrested, fined thousands, forced into community service, and of course, banned for life. Late Night had slammed the door in his face and it never opened again. Kathy Griffin's story hit differently. She didn't torch furniture or cause scenes, she just kept pushing the envelope. Her brand? Say what others won't, no apologies. But that boldness had a cost. She didn't fit the tidy expectations of late-night hosts like Leno or Carson before him. So, slowly and without fanfare, she found herself locked out. No headlines, just doors closing one by one. And Kathy, with all her fire, wasn't someone Johnny would have warmed up to. But not all run-ins were explosive. Some were subtle, almost invisible, until they weren't. Take Melanie Chartoff. She played it smart, kept things light. Her appearances were warm, even charming, especially that memorable episode with George Burns and Richard Dawson. No chaos, no controversy. Carson liked her, and that's what made the difference. Because with Johnny, if you stayed in the lines and read the room, the ride could last. But cross him, even by accident, and it was game over. The truth? It wasn't always about rebellion. Sometimes it was just a misstep. Howie Mandel learned that the hard way. Young and trying to stand out, he brought a giant stuffed tiger on stage, without warning the producers. Just a goofy stunt. But Johnny didn't do surprises. That moment, meant to entertain, marked the end. No confrontation, no drama, just silence. And Howie never got a second chance. Lola Falana brought truth instead of props. Her appearance was electric, and her words were real. She spoke about race, about being a black woman in entertainment. It was powerful, unfiltered, and maybe too raw for Carson's late-night world. The discomfort was evident, and after that night, her name wasn't on the guest list again. Not because she did anything wrong, but because the show wasn't ready for that kind of honesty. Neither, it seems, was America. And then there was Artie Lang. His story didn't begin with Carson, but it carried that same sting. Years later, under Conan O'Brien's watch, Artie was pulled from the guest lineup. Not because he said the wrong thing, but because his struggles with addiction made him unpredictable. At the time, it felt cruel, but Artie would later say it saved him. That ban became the mirror he needed, and in a strange twist, it turned into his second chance. Then came a feud that felt like it belonged in a classic Hollywood drama. Johnny Carson and Wayne Newton were two icons, each ruling his own empire. Vegas shimmered with Newton's presence, while Carson held court in Burbank. On the surface, they were cordial. Smiles, handshakes, laughter on the set. But tension was quietly brewing. It all snapped when Newton outbid Carson for ownership in the Aladdin Hotel. To Newton, it was business. To Carson, it was betrayal. And rather than confront it in private, Carson turned it into punchlines. But these weren't harmless jokes. He mocked Wayne's looks, his voice, even his character, day after day, smirking behind the desk as the audience chuckled. But Wayne didn't laugh. Eventually, Newton walked straight into NBC, alone. No agents, no lawyers, just him. He found Carson backstage and said what needed to be said. Some say voices were raised, others say it was a quiet, forceful moment. But after that, Carson dropped the jokes. And their friendship? That vanished too. In the end, the real lesson wasn't about who got banned or why. It was about how much power Carson had. Not just over guests, but over the legacy of laughter itself. One gesture, one joke, one stare, and everything could change. And if Carson closed that door on you, it usually stayed locked. He walked away from The Tonight Show and never looked back. Wayne Newton, once a crowd favorite, never received another invitation, not even for a cameo. Johnny Carson had drawn his line, and once the applause faded, so did their relationship. Just like that, Newton was out, and Carson's circle closed tighter than ever. But this wasn't just about hurt pride or on-air friction. It was about control, Carson's ultimate weapon, and his greatest flaw. Let's rewind for a moment and pull back the curtain on the man who defined late-night television. Before the world saw him bathed in spotlight and laughter, Johnny Carson was a quiet boy in Nebraska with a fascination for illusion. He wasn't the class clown. He was the quiet observer, studying his audience with magician's focus. The Great Carsoni wasn't just a stage name, it was a clue. Even then, Johnny was shaping the act that would define a generation. From Navy service during World War II to a speech degree from the University of Nebraska, he built his career brick by brick. His ascent was slow, methodical, and driven by obsession. When Johnny took over The Tonight Show in 1962, something shifted in the cultural air. He wasn't loud or outrageous. He didn't need to be. His calm, sharp timing made chaos feel like comfort. Every night, America tuned in not just to laugh, but to find familiarity. And yet behind that inviting grin was a man carefully guarding every crack in the mirror. You couldn't outshine him. You couldn't improvise too long. If you did, the room chilled, while his smile stayed perfectly in place. His private life told a darker, quieter story. The same man who controlled the rhythm of a nation's bedtime couldn't find rhythm in his own relationships. 4 marriages, all with different arcs, but the same ending: disconnect. By the 1970s, he wasn't just a host. He was a financial powerhouse. Earning over $25 million annually at his peak, he invested in everything from real estate to production companies. He owned luxury homes in Malibu and Beverly Hills, drove high-end vehicles including a Mercedes-Benz S-Class and a Jaguar XJ, and wore classic Rolex watches like the Day-Date. He even had access to private jet charters for personal use, reflecting the ultimate Hollywood status. Carson also protected his empire with extensive insurance, covering health, income loss, and asset risk management, something many modern entertainers still study. His legacy teaches a powerful lesson: build slowly, stay quiet, but protect everything. Control wasn't just his style, it was his strategy. But for all the money and mastery, the man remained a mystery. By the time word spread of his illness, emphysema had already done its damage. The once commanding voice faded, and Carson left this world in 2005 as silently as he lived off stage. No grand farewell tour. No tell-all interviews. Just absence. And yet, his influence still whispers through every monologue on late-night TV. Jimmy Fallon's boyish spark, Kimmel's dry jabs, they all echo Carson's rhythm. You feel him in the pause before a punchline, in the grin just before the audience erupts. Johnny Carson wasn't built for today's world of constant content and social media overshare. And maybe that's why he still matters. He let the audience see only what he allowed. And somehow, that made him even more magnetic. He taught us that mystery could still thrive in a spotlight, that mastery didn't need noise, and that even kings step away from their throne when the applause no longer feeds them. His life leaves us wondering, do we really need to know someone to feel like we've known them all our lives? That's the magic Johnny Carson left behind. And if you ever catch one of his old shows, you'll understand. He didn't just host the night, he ruled it. Drop your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss a moment of Hollywood's deepest untold stories. And for more like this, watch the next video on your screen.